Welcome. It is 1300 Eastern time, so we want to make sure we're respectful of everybody's time and kick it off. There are still some people joining into the Zoom webinar, and we've got folks listening both on Facebook Live and on YouTube. So wherever you happen to be, if you're on the webinar, please feel free to use the Q&A function when we get to it, and we will go through those. If you're on Facebook or YouTube, there are chat functions in there. We will try to monitor everything as we go along so that everybody can participate, whatever platform you happen to be using. But so welcome to the final quarter of 2022 iteration of the quarterly webinar series here. CASI and ACC have partnered up. I want to thank our partners at ACC for nominating the topics and putting the word out. They, as usual, can't join us by audio from their spaces, but on their behalf, I will say welcome to everybody and thank you for joining us. It is really great to continue this as we go forward, looking at the strategic competition and at our pacing challenger there, China. So today we have an amazing lineup of folks, like we do often, but this is really a stellar group, and the timing on this could not have been better. As most of you on the call probably know, the Chinese Communist Party every 5 years gets together for a big confab. They call it the Party Congress. This happened to be the 20th time that they've done it, and it just happened, right? So this is the big shakeup in policies and personalities. Everything gets the stamp of approval, and there was a lot of implications. And so the experts we've assembled here today are going to step us through all of those. We're going to start off with Dr. Chung Lee from Brookings. He is probably the foremost expert in Chinese political and domestic political implications and things like that. Studies it, knows it inside and out, and probably outside of Zhongnan High, like I said, pays the most attention to it and has the best insight. So you can see all of their, I will drop in the chat if people want to read their bios, but they're all up on the same website as always. But phenomenal bio. And great to have you with us here, Chung Lee. So great. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
From there, we're going to move to Joel Wuthnow, Dr. Joel Wuthnow, who is joining us from National Defense University. Joel is doing double CASI duty today. We are teaching our PLA fundamentals course at the same time. And so he was partnering with us in the morning, teaching a bunch of our students, and has joined us here for the afternoon for the webinar. So we're going to have to get him a double shot of espresso here at some point. But Joel, thanks for joining.
Thanks, Brendan.
And he's just written a couple articles about the Central Military Commission, the PLA, and that's what he's going to be focused on. And then finally, from the long conference room there at the Center for Naval Analyses, Dr. Dave Finkelstein, who runs the China Center for CNA. CNA has done some terrific work for us, just in general, of course, but also for CASI and partnership as well. And Dave has been looking at China since he was knee-high to a grasshopper, which is a pretty long time. But super happy to have Dave there with us from CNA. He's going to be covering the overall big strategic implications of this. And so really, without further ado, everyone hopefully knows about CASI. If not, I'll stick the website there up in the chat room, but you're not here to hear from me. We're going to go through, we'll go in that order. So Chung Lee, Joel Wuthnow, and Dave Finkelstein. And then we will do some kind of moderated Q&A, and then we'll just go full Q&A. So if, as we're going along, you have questions or comments, throw them in the Q&A function, or like I said, in the chat on YouTube. And when we get to that portion, we will get to it. But for now, that's all for me. And Chung Lee, take it away.
Well, thank you, Brendan, for that overly generous introduction and also for the invitation. I'm honored to speak along with my longtime friend, David and Joe, and also very honored to speak to this distinguished audience. Now, in my 15 minutes presentation, I will focus on 3 issues. All start with the word P, start with a P word. First, talk about power, especially the fact that this party Congress winner takes all. And then I will move to the personnel with a focus on the resurgence of technocrats. And finally, they talk about the policy priority, also with a focus on the technological development and the rise of the so-called Cosmos Club. Those leaders advance their career from aerospace and aviation. So these are the three things that I will cover. Now, before that, let me spend a couple of minutes to talk about the structure and the organization of the Chinese Communist Party. The few months before the party Congress, they announced that the Chinese Communist Party had about 97 million members, 5 million new members since the last party Congress 5 years ago. About the 2,296 are the formal delegates. That does not include some special invited guests, about 80-some people, including Hu Jintao, as we know that he later really created some drama. Also that these delegates, the National Party Congress, over 2,000 people, are supposed to elect the Central Committee, 376 members. These are the same members with the previous two-party Congress, the committee formed. But the difference is this time there's one more full member and one less alternate member. So it's about 205 full member and 171 alternates. Last party Congress is 204 full members and 172 alternates. Now, Power Bureau this time actually it's different from the previous party Congress. They usually have 25 people, although there's no rule that how many people are supposed to be in Power Bureau, but this time one person less, so 24. And of course, most important is the Power Bureau Standing Committee. 7 members are still the same with the previous two party Congresses or central committees. These are the most important, most powerful leader, the superior decision-making body. And of course, on top of that is General Secretary Xi Jinping. Now, this is the 6 important bodies formed at the 20th Party Congress, including Central Committee and also Central Commission of Discipline Inspection. This is an anti-corruption body with 133 people. And about 65% are yellow color are the new members. The same thing with the Central Committee, it's also about the 65% new members. So it's a very high turnover rate. Now, in the Secretariat, this is the body, very much like the White House Chief of Staff Office, to handle the flow of information, the daily events and the meetings, both domestic visits and foreign visits, and the foreign leaders visit, and etc. It's a very, very important body. All 7 members are first-timers. Then above that, it's the Power Bureau, although there's some overlap between Secretary and the Power Bureau. More than half, 13 out of 24, are first-timers. Now, let's come to the most important leadership body, it's Power Bureau Standing Committee. 4 out of 7 are first-timers. Now, in terms of Central Military Commission, I'm sure that Joe will tell us more, and David probably also will talk about military leadership change. Among the 7 members of among 7 members of CMC, 3 are new. It sounds like a small change, but if you look at the military delegates, especially military members of the Central Committee, there are altogether 66 of them. 85% are first-timers or promoted from alternative to central members. So it's a significant change. And just like last party Congress, last Central Committee. Now, these are the preview. Now, let's come to the 3 points that I want to share with you. One is the power, winner takes all. Now, look at the Xi Jinping's 2 previous terms. Now, as he entered the 3rd term just over a month ago at the 20th Party Congress. The first term, he did not hit his own people. He largely ruled the country through his political allies, and from Jiang Zemin's protege, Xi Jinping himself was one of them. So particularly relying on the strong support from Wang Qishan, the anti-corruption czar in his first term, and then in his second term, the vice president of PRC. He also need to work along with potential rivals, the Hu Jintao's protege, Li Keqiang and Liu Yingshan, both of them advanced their career from the Chinese Communist Youth League, known as Tuanpai. So in the post-Deng China, China is largely ruled by so-called collective leadership, 2 coalitions. one led by Jiang Zemin, one led by Hu Jintao, kind of share power. So that's his first term of Xi Jinping. It's the first term. The second term, he started to promote his own proteges, longtime friend, to important position that included Li Zhansu, National People's Congress chairman, and Zhao Leji, who was the organization czar, personnel czar in his first term, then later replaced Wang Qishan as anti-corruption commission czar. Now this is Xi Jinping's own people. Now also at the same time, Jiang Zemin's proteges, both Wang Funing and Han Zheng, advanced their career from Shanghai, known as the Shanghai Gang, also took 2 seats. Two Tuanpai leaders, Li Keqiang and Wang Yang, also served as the Power Standing Committee. Now he started his third term. He promoted 5 of his proteges. Many of them worked under him for 30-some years, served as his chief of staff, Wu Mishu. And so that's the big change. This is what we call winner take all. The only person was not primarily promoted by Xi Jinping is Wang Funing, the person really famous for his argument for the Chinese authoritarianism. So it's a very much like-minded person. So that's a structure. So he dominated power. Now, look at the so-called Tuanpai Hu Jintao's people. In Xi Jinping's first term, in the 25 members of Power Bureau, they occupied 6 seats, then reduced to 3, now become 0 in the current Power Bureau. So Hu Chenhua not only failed to get a seat in the Power Bureau Standing Committee, even lost his previous seat in the Power Bureau, 24 people. Now, this has also happened in the lower level, in low, actually, it's not that low. They are the governors and the provincial party secretaries, very, very important leadership bodies under the national leadership. Many of them are in the Central Committee as 4 members. Now, you can see that in the Hu Jintao era, in these 10 years, gradual increase. This is a percentage. And in 2014, in the first couple of years of Xi Jinping era, that because Hu Jintao's people still dominated the provincial level leadership, 35 or 36%, then gradually decline, and then now it's 0 in the 62 provincial governors and provincial party secretaries. So this has happened not only at the national level, but also provincial level in the Central Committee, and certainly there's a 0 presentation, no complete absence in the Power Standing Committee and the Power Bureau. Now, let me move to a second point. It's about the personnel, particularly, of course, there's a lot of interesting development in the personnel, but because of time concern, I only want to focus on one, the resurgence of the technocrats. Now, technocrats was it's a relatively new phenomenon in the reform era China, particularly in the post-Deng Xiaoping era, although Deng Xiaoping played a very, very important role to promote people like Li Peng and Jiang Zemin, Zhu Rongji. These are all technocrats. In the 15th Party Congress and the 16th Party Congress, 1997 and the 2002, very much like the entire Jiang Zemin era. Actually, the Power Bureau Standing Committee, these 9 members of the Power Bureau Standing Committee at that time, 9 members, they are all engineers by training. So it's 100% technocrats. Now, if we look at the blue line, it's a Power Bureau, also almost 3/4. Then decline, especially in the Hu Jintao era. So the last Party Congress 5 years ago, there's only 1 member in the Power Bureau, and that was Yu Zhengzhen, and also that it's 0 in the Power Bureau Standing Committee. Actually, 10 years ago, Yu Zhengzhen served as that. But Power Bureau is also a few of them, 2 or 3 of them. It's 8%. But now rebound this Party Congress. So you can see that the decline under Hu Jintao, then rebound particularly in Xi Jinping's 3rd term. Now, in terms of technocrats, I have a strict definition. I wrote my dissertation in early 1990s, talk about technocrat. They should meet the 3 criteria in terms of education, occupation, position. The person should have academic experience, majoring in engineering or the natural science, then also should practice, have the professional experience as an engineer or as a scientist. For example, Xi Jinping was an engineering major, but he never practiced as an engineer, so not to qualify as a definition of technocrat. And also, of course, not just a regular engineer, they should serve in the leadership position if they have political experience as a party state leader. So you should meet all these 3 criteria to be a so-called technocrat. Now, this is the actually Wall Street Journal, 3 or 4 weeks ago, had a long article about the resurgence of technocrats. They cite extensively of my research, and this chart is actually from my research I provided to Wall Street Journal. They quoted adequately. You can see that in Deng Xiaoping era, in 1982, this is only 2 or 3% in the Central Committee met the definition of technocrats. Then rapidly increased when the Jiang Zemin era in 1997 reached a peak. It's more than 50% in the 300. Actually over 204 members of the Central Committee. This is exclude the alternate members because alternate members sometimes their educational background not entirely open to information not available, although now increasingly available for the researchers like myself. So the Hu Jintao era started to decline, and the Xi Jinping's first 2 terms, largely because of the legacy of Hu Jintao continued to be low, but now rebound is about 40% among the 204 members of the Central Committee. Very important leadership bodies, including governors, provincial party secretaries, ministers, top military elites, and etc. Now, when we talk about the technocrats, if those in the military and study engineering and the science and practice in that regard, then also in the military rank, also considered the military technocrats. Yeah. Now, compare with the first, Jiang Zemin and Hu Jintao era, the technocrats, with the Xi Jinping era. I will call Xi Jinping era technocrats like a technocrats 2.0. I wrote an article on that subject. Now, here's a comparison between technocrats in the Jiang Zemin and the Hu Jintao era and the technocrats in the Xi Jinping era. In the post-Deng era, Jiang Zemin and Hu Jintao era, most of these technocrats studied in Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, and also in Hu Jintao era, almost entirely studied in China, Tsinghua University, and etc. They usually major electric double E's, civil engineering, and water engineering, and etc. They only completed, majority of them completed only undergraduates. They did not, except Wen Jiabao and Wu Guanzheng. There's very few people study graduate school. Most of them just, the education level was undergraduate. Yeah. And they also made their career largely through local administration from county, prefect, and municipal government, and the provincial government, etc. And some of them, of course, also serve in the companies like Jiang Zemin, and but the companies serve. It's very small. It's very local, and as we heard the eulogy of Jiang Zemin, that he served as the factory director of Yiming food companies in Shanghai, and etc. Now, they actually spend most of the time as provincial leaders or municipal leaders. Roughly the tenure is 15 to 25 years. But look at the technocrats in the Xi Jinping era. Many of them studied in Western countries, in Japan and especially United States. And also they, the field they attended, including aerospace, most importantly, and also artificial intelligence, biology, environmental science, nuclear energy, and etc. Many of them attended graduate school, and significant of them got PhDs. And also they advanced their career instead of local government, largely from the SOEs, research institutions, and the university administrations. There are a lot of university presidents or party secretaries in the Central Committee. And these companies are huge. They are Fortune 500 company and also global companies. And relatively speaking, they have less experience in the provincial level, usually, and before they move to the top. they spend a few years, but that's only 2 to 10 years as tenure in the provincial municipal government. But most of the time they spend 15 or 25 years, 20-some years in the SOEs, major companies. Now, finally, my last point, the priorities. As I interpret that Xi Jinping actually put the national security and social political stability and the technology innovation as the top priority, and not the economic development per se. And because compared with the national security and social political stability, they should be the driver. This may not be uniquely Chinese. Certainly, Party Congress highlighted that China's top or Xi Jinping's top priority. But of course, that the recent protests certainly challenge this stability and also challenge the system superiority to a certain extent. You compare with the other countries, the lockdown was over, that look at the soccer games, that no one wear mask, but China, what a contrast. So that certainly undermines Xi Jinping's claim. But also in terms of the economic policy, it's still important, even it's not in the driver's seat. But that it should be emphasized on continuity from the Xi Jinping's leadership in 2012, which emphasized poverty elimination. Now is to enhance more people into the middle class rank or middle income rank. It's very much the previously called the China dream. They still call that, but also at the new term called common prosperity. So these are the economic policies differ from the single-minded economic growth and etc. So these are the priority. Now with that, I particularly want to emphasize the rapid rise of the Cosmos Club. Now, these are the examples of the rising stars in the China's aerospace industry, including 2 people now enter the Power Bureau. Plus Zhang Youxia also spent a lot of time in the aerospace. There are 3 members in the Power Bureau, 1 military, 2 civilian. And of course, there's a very strong ties between military and the civilian in the so-called fusion, military civilian fusion in that area. Aerospace is particularly very strong in this regard. Plus other 3 people, and Hao Peng just after Party Congress now moved from SASAC chairman to Liaoning Party secretary. He maybe next Party Congress, he will be a leading candidate for Power Bureau seat. Now also plus the other 2 people, Zhang Qingwei, and I will go back to talk about that just a few minutes, and also Jing Zhuangrong, and also the person in charge of the fusion, military civilian fusion, now is the Minister of the Industrial and the Information Technology, Gong Xingbu. Now look at these people, they all serve as the commander chief or deputy commander chief in China's kind of moon launch and manned space engineering program. So they are really rocket scientists by training. Now, this is the chart I just completed a few days ago, that the industrial background of the civilian members of the Central Committee and in terms of members, certainly that the aerospace aviation still is the number 1. It's higher than those who advanced their career from banking and finance. These are calculated people, these leaders had previous experience as SOEs or senior executives in industry. They may or may not continue at the moment. They shifted to provincial level leadership or Power Bureau, but their previous experience, that's actually quite remarkable to see that the aerospace dominated. Now, but the aerospace industry, not all in the same faction. Actually, if you look at that, it's very interesting to see 2 people did not get advance their career as people expected. One is Zhang Qingwei. Zhang Qingwei actually previously served as a full member of Central Committee in 16, 17, 18, 19. It's a very strong background. And also served as the provincial chief in Hebei, in Heilongjiang, now in Hunan. And he was the former president of Comac, the commercial aircraft, and also the former CASI CEO. But people expect that he will get a seat in the Power Bureau. But for some reason, we still do not understand, maybe related factional ties, and he could not make it. Another person is He Dongfeng, current president of Comac. And he was an auditor member, but could not even make to the delegate. And he also former assistant to Zhang Qingwei. So these people, they assume that they come from the same faction within the Cosmos, they could not advance. So I just wanted to say that even the Cosmos Club, that's the so-called the aerospace and the industry, they advance very aggressively, but they may not be in the same faction. We do need to pay attention. Now, this is the chart I presented in an article published in China-US Focus a few 2 or 3 months ago, and talk about in the aerospace industry, there's a famous 11 academies, 1院、2院、3院、4院. This is the way they organize. You can see, particularly look at Zhang Qingwei and He Dongfeng. They come from the same sector. Later on, both of them moved to the Comac. So that may explain why these two people could not advance. Maybe some it's not belong to the right network and etc. So of course, because of time, I could not go details. And my point is, we do need to pay attention in the subgroup within the Cosmos Club. Now, also that I'm sure that my colleagues, David and Joe, will talk about military. I do not want to say too much, but I only want to mention there's a Cosmos Club is also very strongly represented in the military leadership. Now, Zhang Youxia was in charge of military equipment, and also he was the commander-in-chief of China's moon landing program for a long time. And he and Li Shangfu highly likely will become defense minister. He is already in the CMC. These two people really have solid background in aerospace. Now, except for these two people, other leaders are much younger, including the Air Force commander and also the National University of Defense Technology president. They were born in 1967. These are the rising stars. They all have the solid experience in the military field on the aerospace and with the Air Force or missile or or kind of rocket force and or other special strategic support force, but they are all concentrated on aerospace and aviation. So let me stop here. I will be, I'm sure that my colleague will continue to talk about the military elites, which will be their focus. Brandon, over to you.
Terrific. Well, as everyone can see, I was not kidding about the in-depth knowledge there. Those are some pretty detailed research that he's going in all his connections. And I'm really excited. He and I have talked about this Cosmos Club, obviously being from the China Aerospace Studies Institute, something near and dear to my heart. But anyway, with that, we've already got some questions coming in. If you got questions, throw them in the Q&A or in the chat. But we will now hand it over to Joel.
Super. Okay. Thanks so much, Brendan, for inviting me to be here, and delighted to join Chung-Li and also Dave Finkelstein, who are both heroes and mentors in the field for a long time now. So I think my role here is to dig a little bit deeper, kind of building on what Chung-Li has just presented, but talking a bit more about the Central Military Commission. The CMC, of course, I think, as most of you will know, is the highest level decision-making organ of the PLA at the strategic level. Their membership tends to change only rarely, really only every 5 years or so at the party Congress. And so it's a chance really to take stock, I think, based on the new membership of the CMC, where the PLA is heading and what this tells us, if anything, about Xi Jinping's priorities. So the way I'm going to kind of lean into this is to push back a little bit on the sort of media narrative, or some of the headlines that came out just after the Party Congress that were sort of claiming that the new Central Military Commission membership sort of indicated that Xi Jinping might be a bit more war prone, if you will, on the Taiwan question, that it can tell us something about his plans, his aspirations, potentially to use force. I view this as a misleading set of headlines. Ones, however, that were convenient because they in turn sort of built on the idea that Xi Jinping perceives China to have a certain window of opportunity to act on Taiwan, or potentially to have a deadline to act against Taiwan. And the claim of the media was essentially that the appointment of He Weidong, who used to be the Eastern Theater commander up to the level of CMC vice chairman, so skipping a grade from theater commander to vice chairman. But this indicated that she was serious. This was another data point or sign that she may indeed be considering or contemplating the use of force against Taiwan sometime in the next 5 years. But I don't think we can make those inferences with any level of confidence. And in fact, I don't think we can really infer anything from the new CMC selections about Xi's specific plans or timelines if they exist towards Taiwan. But I think they can reveal something about Xi's aspirations to continue to build the PLA into a much more modern and capable military that is ready for a range of contingencies, including in the Southeast coast sometime in the next 5 years. So I'm going to try to build that argument here in basically three parts. Okay. So first of all, what I want to argue is that the structure, the composition of the CMC is really exactly the same as what it was in the last 5 years. So Xi Jinping has options to increase the size of the CMC or to add offices or to make it, for example, more operationally focused. But he didn't do any of those things. Really, the CMC post 20th Party Congress is still a 7-person organization. Xi Jinping retains his post as CMC chairman, 6 uniformed military officers. 3 of those officers are the same people, so you only have a transition of 50% of the CMC. But in addition to this, the offices of the PLA that are represented ex officio on the CMC did not change. And so I think that's significant in terms of evaluating consistency. And so the offices of the CMC that continue to be represented on the CMC are the defense minister. So that is most likely to be Li Shangfu. Then we have the Joint Staff Department, which is sort of the key operational organ of the PLA, the Political Work Department, and finally the Discipline Inspection Commission. And so this lineup of offices was engineered at the 19th Party Congress, which was, in my view, more of a pivotal or transformational moment for the CMC than 2022, when you have half the same people, all the same offices, and Xi Jinping staying on for another 5-year term. And so consistency is one. So the second area that I'll touch on kind of briefly here has to do with the kind of expertise that Xi is placing at his sort of military high command. I think what drove the media's attention was really the appointment of He Weidong, who previously served as the commander of the Eastern Theater Command and was reputedly responsible for China's actions over the summer in the wake of Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan. And so I think this gave a sense that Xi was muscling up the CMC to have more of a Taiwan focus in terms of its expertise. In reality, however, if you look at the 6 uniformed members of the 20th Party Congress CMC, only 2 have ever actually served in the Nanjing military region, now the Eastern Theater Command. He is, in fact, the only officer who has real operational experience in the Eastern Theater. Miao Hua, he is another holdover. He served in the Nanjing military region for a period of time as a political commissar years ago. But what you don't see him doing is stacking the Central Military Commission with a whole bunch of folks who have a specific operational expertise relevant to Taiwan. Rather, you see sort of a mix of life experiences, career experiences that give you the impression that what she's really trying to do is to get different kinds of perspectives at the military decision-making table. And so we can see that in a few different respects. So first of all, if you look at the biographies of these 6, you have folks who served in all of the different theater commands. There are 5 theater commands of the PLA. All of them are sort of represented in terms of experience. You have half of the CMC folks who have an operational background. The other half are folks who have a political commissar background. So he values sort of a balance between operational advice and expertise and a political party control type of expertise. You have a couple folks, as Changli just mentioned, who had been previously in charge of the PLA's equipment development department. That's Zhang Yoxia, who stayed on despite breaking the age norm at 72 years old. He was sort of a rare case of Xi Jinping willing to break the age normal, usually 69, you retire. but Zhang Yoxia stayed on as one of the CMC vice chairman. Zhang Yoxia does not have an operational background relevant to Taiwan. He served for much of his career in the Northeast, but he also served in a pivotal position as the director of the Equipment Development Department. Same goes for Li Shangfu, who was the EDD director very recently. You also have a couple folks who have combat experience. So Zhang Yoxia served in the 1979 conflict, and you have Liu Zhenli, who is taking over the Joint Staff Department, who served on the border with Vietnam in the mid-1980s and had some combat experience then. Some of the folks here have personal connections. They go way back with Xi Jinping, and certainly Zhang Yoxia is one of them. Their families have been intertwined since at least the 1940s. You have other folks who were probably overlapped, or certainly did overlap, and maybe knew Xi to one degree or another, serving in the Nanjing military region, a couple of them in the 1990s when Xi was there. So he's known a couple of these folks, Miao Hua in particular, for quite some time, He Weidong being the other. And then you also have folks, however, who really don't have any longstanding personal connections, as far as we know, with Xi Jinping, folks who, like Liu Zhenli, have simply given themselves credit for modernizing or being a part of the modernization of the PLA, Liu Zhenli being a proponent of army modernization himself. So what you have here is a balanced mix of expertise, I would argue, that is appropriate if you think of the function of the CMC as making strategic level decisions on a range of issues ranging from acquisition to political work to operational planning, but you don't see myopic expertise that's focused specifically on the Taiwan problem set. And then the final factor that I'll point to here has to do with really the surprising lack of joint expertise on the Central Military Commission. So certainly any high intensity conflict with Taiwan would be inherently a joint affair, whether it's an island landing, whether it's a blockade, whether it's a missile bombardment. You really need folks to plan and organize and implement those activities who understand joint operations, who have experience directing forces from other services, who themselves do not necessarily represent a single service. And so you want balance and you want joint expertise, but the new CMC doesn't really have that. So what they do have are 6 people who are all career by background and entering the PLA, career Army officers, all 6 of them. A couple of them transferred into other services later in their careers as political officers. Miao Hua moved into the Navy very late in his career, and Zhang Shengmin, who is responsible for discipline inspection, transferred into the rocket force about halfway through his career. But really, all of these folks are career Army people. And so you have no operational Air Force experience, you have no operational naval experience, and you don't really have much sort of operational rocket force experience either. And so this wouldn't really be the right group of people, sort of similar to our Joint Chiefs of Staff, to bring multiple service perspectives to a single table. And what you also don't have in this CMC are folks who have a significant amount of joint command or joint staff experience in their careers. In particular, surprising Liu Zhenli, who is slated to take over the Joint Staff Department. But Liu, even compared to his contemporaries, has really no joint experience. He has never held a joint command assignment in his career. He has risen up through the ranks entirely in the PLA ground forces, and that's how he has distinguished himself. And so from this operational perspective, I don't really think you have assembled the right group of people to direct, to plan, to think through, to even micromanage a joint fight across the Taiwan Strait. And so that's another sign to me that that's not what the purpose of this body is intended to be in the next 5 years. So what are the implications of this? First of all, I don't think we can infer very much about Xi Jinping's timelines or plans or aspirations to use force from this particular collection of individuals. It doesn't mean that China will not find itself in a conflict of one type or another with Taiwan in the coming years. I think we're already, frankly speaking, in sort of a new normal of increased and higher intensity military operations across around the Taiwan Strait and near Taiwan in general. We may or may not see a further escalation of those tensions in the few years hence. But I don't think that we can infer much about actual war plans or timelines for war from Xi Jinping's perspective. However, this group of people could be pushed into a conflict in various sorts of scenarios, including if, for example, after the 2024 presidential election in Taiwan, if they move much more firmly towards independence, this could prompt an escalation of military conflict by the PLA. And so these would be de facto sort of the senior most advisors to Xi Jinping, and they would have to sort of be forced into playing this sort of a role of delivering advice. And so that raises kind of a final question that I want to touch on here, which is what is the relationship between Xi Jinping and his military advisors, and how would that relationship influence his decision-making on questions of peace and war? Well, I think, frankly speaking, we don't have great insight into how this relationship works. I think what I fear is that the high degree of centralization of authority around Xi Jinping after the 20th Party Congress could create a dynamic in which the military advice that he receives from his senior commanders is not necessarily unvarnished, candid, and influential. I worry that he is surrounding himself by folks who have proven themselves to be political loyalists, who have proven themselves to not necessarily be big-time risk takers or speaking truth to authority, if you will, that if he himself, Xi Jinping, determines that war is the best choice for China, that his military key lieutenants are not going to try to talk him out of it. And so this would be sort of the reverse of the situation 20 years ago when Jiang Zemin came in with very ambitious plans for Taiwan, and the PLA essentially walked him back towards more realistic goals. So I worry that that might not be the case as much anymore. And so the parallel that one might draw from this is H.R. McMaster's masterwork, Dereliction of Duty, in which a political decision maker had determined a strategy and key military advisors essentially failed to provide the best candid advice to the president and to the public that would dissuade highly escalatory or risk-taking behaviors that are not well advised. And so that's sort of the concern. I don't know that that dynamic will actually play out, but the centralization of power, I think, given historical cases, is something that we should all be concerned and worried about. Okay, so with that, Brendan, let me turn it back over to you.
All right, well, that was terrific, and I really like how you draw out the fact that the PLA, one of the whole reasons for the reform was to go joint, was to make them more capable, more like the United States in form and function, and get war fighting into seemingly the lexicon of all the PLA senior leaders. And yet here you go, CMC, like you said, not very joint at all. So we'll pick that apart maybe a little bit more in the Q&A. And again, we've got some questions coming in, but please feel free to keep using those. All right, and with that, we will shift over to Dr. Dave Finkelstein down there at CNA to give us the big picture strategic view of this and tie it all together for us. No pressure, though, no pressure.
Thanks. Can you all hear me?
Yep, got you loud and clear.
Fantastic. Two great presentations from two respected colleagues and a terrific moderator in Brendan. Thanks very much. I am not going to focus on personalities, but talk perhaps more to policies. And with the 20th Party Congress now about 1 month behind us, the dust has now settled a bit, and there's been a little bit more time for reflection in order to get past the headlines and instead perhaps place the military and security dimensions of the Congress into a larger context. Now, for those of you who are out there multitasking at the moment, let me give you my two bottom lines up front, then you can go back to your phones. So here's one bottom line I'll start with. First, reading the report to the Congress, it seems to me that the policy guidance to the military strongly suggests that going forward, the PLA is going to be even more operationally oriented in attempting to shape the security situation along its periphery. So that's one. Second, and this one really is concerning to me, Xi Jinping, in his report to the Congress, offered a very worrisome assessment of Beijing's external security situation that is going to provide the context for future decisions on foreign policy, security policy, and military policy. So let me begin with some comments on defense and military affairs at the Congress. So first, the Congress fundamentally revalidated the fundamental and unprecedented military modernization and reform program that was launched back in early 2016. And so what kind of PLA is Beijing seeking? Well, since coming to power in 2012, Xi Jinping has directed the PLA to become a military that, one, is more red politically, two, is more joint operationally, three, is more expeditionary in reach, and four, more high-tech in emerging domains. And now with this Congress, a fifth mandate for the PLA, one that is more forward-leaning operationally. And I'll talk more about that in just a bit. Second, the report to the Congress conveys to the PLA a sense of mounting urgency in achieving its modernization objectives. The same sense of urgency that was imparted to the PLA at the fifth plenum of the 19th Central Committee in 2020, when the PLA was told to, quote unquote, accelerate its march to the attainment of world-class standards by 2049. In this report, 2 years later, the PLA is urged to work more quickly, work faster, make unremitting efforts, intensify efforts to move military modernization forward, and focus on making progress to meet its near, mid, and long-term military modernization goals. Now, this Congress puts special emphasis on the PLA attaining its near-term goals for the year 2027. We can talk more about that during Q&A if you're interested. So the question then becomes, why this sense of urgency? One can only speculate, but this sense of urgency may be linked, I think, to Beijing's increasing worry about its external security situation, and I'll talk more about that in just a moment. But third, on the military side, and this one I think is quite important, the party seems to be giving the PLA guidance to be more operationally oriented going forward. This was suggested in the political report itself and in the PLA's post-Congress propaganda blitz. You can learn as much about what the Congress intended by reading the post-Congress media than reading the Congress media itself, I would say. So, for example, Xi Jinping's report to the Congress calls for the PLA to do three things simultaneously. One, become better at deploying on a regular basis. Two, preparing for future contingencies. And three, doing the first two while continuing to modernize. In other words, the PLA has been told it's going to have to operate in the here and now. It's going to have to prepare for conflicts later on. And it's going to have to do both of those while it's reforming its institutions and modernizing its hardware. In other words, and the report is very explicit about this, the PLA needs to be able to do those three things explicitly, according to the report, to shape, that's the word they use, to shape the PRC security environment, deter and manage crises, and win local wars. So there's a real operational warfighting mindset that's being passed down to the PLA. Now, former Central Military Commission former Vice Chairman, Xu Qiliang, General Xu, reinforced this operational focus in a People's Daily editorial under his name on November 7th, a couple of weeks after the Congress. And he wrote that for the next 5 years and perhaps even longer, the PLA must focus on fighting, preparing for contingencies, and modernizing all at the same time. General Xu also added that the PLA should be prepared to fight for every inch of land on issues involving national sovereignty and territorial integrity. So question, does this language mean that the PLA is preparing to launch some sort of conflict in the near term? My answer is, I don't know. Only the PLA knows the answer to that. But what I think it does mean is that the PLA is being reoriented to an operational warfighting mindset, one parenthetically that actually comports with how they have been operating along their periphery for some time now. Anybody who's following PLA activities in the Indo-PACOM AOR knows about the number of sorties they're running against Taiwan, into the ADIZ during the Pelosi visit or after her visit, across the midline, the number of naval operations around circumnavigating the island. In other words, in my view, what the PLA is being dragged out of is a previous institutional mindset where the Chinese military was either A, in a war footing, about to go to war, a wartime footing, or B, a peacetime army modernization or military modernization stance. But that had been the traditional mindset. We're either preparing for a war or we're modernizing. Now they're being told they've got to do all of this at the same time. So this operational reorientation and the sense of urgency imparted to the PLA in the report to the Congress also comports with rising concerns in Beijing about their external environment. If you are a planner in the PLA and you look around you, if you're in the PLA J3 and J5 or the J2 out there in Beijing, you live in a tough neighborhood. So let's turn to some of their views of the external security environment. So for me, frankly, one of the most striking features of Xi Jinping's political report to the Congress was the sense of rising concern, some might even say anxiety and uncertainty, that he conveyed when describing the PRC's external security situation. Whereas Xi Jinping's report to the Congress conveyed a sense of triumphalism when enumerating all of the parties and PLA's progress since the 19th Congress in 2017, this report's discussion of China's external security situation conveyed a sense of trepidation. And if those of you who have spent time with the report, and I suggest you skim it, then there are some remarkable statements in it. The very first paragraph of the report says that China is faced with grave, intricate international developments and a series of immense risks and challenges. That's in the first paragraph of the report. The report speaks to, quote, drastic changes in the international landscape and in a reference to the United States, especially external attempts to blackmail, contain, blockade, and exert maximum pressure on China. The report says that the world has entered a new period of turbulence and change, that external attempts, listen to this, external attempts to suppress and contain China may escalate at any time. There are unforeseen factors rising, the report says, with black swan and gray rhino events that can pop up at any moment. Unilateralism and protectionism are mounting. The global economic recovery is sluggish. Regional conflicts and disturbances are frequent. The world has entered a new period of turbulence and change. Wow. And these assessments continued after the Congress. For example, when Xi Jinping visited the PLA's Joint Operations Command Center just a week after the Congress, the Chinese press reported Xi Jinping telling the PLA officers present that, quote, there is increasing instability and uncertainty in our country's security situation. And then again, reinforcing this, General Xu Qiliang, former CMC vice chairman, in his People's Daily editorial the day before that visit, said, quote, the factors of instability and unpredictability in our country's national security situation are increasing. In my view, these are very alerting comments suggesting that there is rising concern in Beijing about its external security situation. And if those sorts of statements were not enough to get the attention of China watchers, I was absolutely gobsmacked by the absence of two judgments in the report to the 20th Party Congress that had been judgments for decades. In fact, were verbatim judgments in the 18th and 19th Party Congress. Specifically, the first judgment that is missing in action in this report is an assessment that was made by Deng Xiaoping in the mid-1980s that says peace and development are the keynote of the times. Now, in Xi Jinping's report, the judgment is that the deficit in peace and development is growing. The world has reached a crossroads. This significant departure from past verbiage is eye-catching because it was Deng Xiaoping's judgment back in the 1980s that the world was in a period of peace and development, that provided the theoretical underpinning for Deng Xiaoping's policies of reform and opening up, and which allowed the PLA to be more relaxed about external military threats and the possibility of war. So this judgment has been changed. And actually last night I was on a Zoom with the PLA and we were discussing this, maybe for another time. Now, the second key judgment that is missing from this report is this one. China's development is still in a period of important strategic opportunity. That is missing. It's been in reports for the last at least 3 reports. Instead, Xi Jinping's report says that our country has entered a period of development in which strategic opportunities, risks, and challenges are concurrent, and uncertainties and unforeseen factors are rising. So I've been very taken with some of this alerting verbiage. Okay, so let me sum up and conclude here with a couple of thoughts. What do we make out of all of this? Well, first, we should not be surprised going forward, based on the guidance in the party report. We should not be surprised if the PLA increases the frequency, duration, and perhaps the scale of operations around its periphery, wherever they feel there is pressure being placed on PRC sovereignty as they define it. This could include the Indian border, the South China Sea, the East China Sea, the Yellow Sea, and certainly in the vicinity of Taiwan. So I think going forward, out in Indo-PACOM, PACAF, and all of our colleagues out there should be watching for increased operational activities. Second, it is crystal clear that the party is worried about the state of international security affairs in general and China's external security situation in particular. So worried, in fact, that for the first time in decades, the party was not prepared to judge that peace and development remains the keynote of the times. These formulations are not merely theoretical constructs. This new and uncertain assessment will provide the context against which the party, which is clearly worried, is going to make decisions about how much risk to take at home in dealing with domestic challenges. And these assessments will inform Beijing's foreign policies, its security policies, and its approach to military and national security affairs. So watch this space. Over.
Well, so now I'm frozen. Hold on a second. All right, so that is a fantastic wrap up, and that's exactly why we have folks like you that do this kind of nitty gritty reading, nerding out on the verbiage and all the stuff. I totally agree with the fact that it is somewhat. I think you called it alarming. That's probably not an over exaggeration of it to say that they no longer feel that peace and stability. And specifically the period of strategic opportunity is in there. And so I've always told people I thought that the implication of strategic opportunity meant that China didn't see going to war, a great power conflict, anywhere in the next 5 to 10 years. So they said it a couple of years ago, but I wonder if that now puts a bookend on that time frame. So thanks for doing all the research and digging into the really thick Chinese and stuff like that to go through that. What I want to do is invite everyone else back on and see what we can do to tie these together, and then do a little crosstalk, and then we'll absolutely get to some Q&A there. But first, I wanted to go to Joel and see if maybe you could either expand on or pull the thread of what Chun-Li was talking about with the Cosmos Club. Do you see the influence of these aerospace background, aerospace movers and shakers, both in the PLA and in the leadership of the party itself? Does that portend any, maybe what can we draw from that going forward as to what China is going to do for its air and space forces?
Okay, sure. Well, I mean, I really in this topic would yield to Chung, since he's done the spade work on it. I would point out, first of all, that although you can draw sort of a line around a group of people who bring a certain type of expertise to the Politburo, to the Central Committee, on the other hand, you have all sorts of different types of expertise, right, in the upper echelon of the PLA. So in particular, if we look at the Central Military Commission, I think, you still have evidence of sort of a low-tech, big army kind of mentality. A couple of these folks have been in charge of the equipment department. The majority have not. If you look at, sort of a layer below the Central Military Commission at the theater command level, you have a lot of folks who have been involved with very traditional sorts of career trajectories in which they grow up through their individual services. They excel as, for example, a group army commander and then a theater deputy commander and so on. You have a very, very limited amount of folks with very highly advanced training or education, especially in civilian universities. I think you can isolate and handpick a collection of these people and say that they are a lobby or a group who will have outsized political influence based on some common factor. But on the other hand, I don't necessarily think that is determinative of future policy, or that will give, for example, the strategic support force a leg up in bureaucratic competition with the Army, the Navy, or the rocket force, et cetera. So I'm not sure exactly how to evaluate the impact of it. I would say that, just sort of backing up beyond personality, that there used to be, back more than 5 years ago, the idea of, sort of the Air Force taking on an aerospace mission, which was sort of a combined air and space mission. But the powers that be decided that was perhaps a bridge too far, if you will, an over-consolidation of power. And so they split off and created the strategic support force. And so I would say you have multiple powers centers, folks who are involved in different pieces of this. But if we're going to aggregate that into an argument that there is a specific lobby that will crowd out resourcing for the Navy, for example, that might be an overreading of some of the data. But again, I think, Chung has done very good work in identifying this group and the connections between them. I just don't know if I would, be as strong in predicting their political influence over.
Yeah, so those are great points, and I think it's interesting that you talked also a lot about the mindsets and the framing, right? And that was one thing that Dave brought up, and so maybe I'll throw it over to him. And do you see any indication, in the reading of the strategic documents and all the work reports, that the PLA is really ready to train and educate its force, other than trying to make just a couple high level, hey, we need to change what we're doing? Do you see any concrete evidence of their ability to actually do this? Because, at the end of the day, we at CASI, we don't do a lot on the hardware, but we do a lot on the soft, squishy, pink things that operate all that hardware. So thoughts on this change in mindset, and how much of the big picture stuff that gets talked about at the Congress filters down into reality?
Yeah, so many great points made by Chung and Joel. I'll throw a couple of thoughts out there. I'm an old enough soldier. I'm a retired Army officer. And it took an act of Congress to force the United States military to become a joint force. Left to its own devices, the United States military would not have become the joint force that it is today. And just as it took an act of Congress to force the US to become a joint force, it took the force of the party to force the PLA to do what it had long known it had to do, but did not have the willpower to do. And if you would have looked at the US military in 1991, which is the same distance the PLA is from 2016, you would have looked at the US military and you would have seen a lot of different colored uniforms, but you probably wouldn't have seen a lot of flag officers with a lot of joint experience. So this is all a way of saying that the PLA is at the incipient point of its journey towards becoming a joint force. And I think we need to be circumspect in making judgments about can they, can't they, will they, won't they at this particular point. This is going to be a generational endeavor for them to change mindsets. In some cases, it may never work. You know, for example, again, just not to beat the horse to death, you know, before Goldwater Nichols, you almost had to arrest an 06 in any service to take a joint position. Because when you left Mother Air Force or Mother Army and took a joint position, you were in the black hole for the promotion board. But after Goldwater Nichols, when the law declared that you cannot become a flag officer until you have a joint assignment, you could have been run over at the entrance to the Pentagon with 06s of all different colors trying to get that joint assignment. So again, this is a long process, Over.
Yeah, perfect. I see Chung wants to jump in, and that's exactly right. I want to get the how much do you think the party is able to do this for him?
Well, I want to echo both. I mean, David and Joe's excellent point. Certainly, that China's joint operation is still in the relatively early stage. So I appreciate David's, assessment. It's an ongoing effort. I think Joe was right that you do not see anyone made a reputation as the person really pushed for joint operation, except Xi Jinping himself talked about that a lot. Of course, his predecessor also, Jiang Zemin, also talked about that before. Now, but I want to, it's not a contrast, but just wanted to complement what Joe said. I will not see that CMC, the composition, heavily on the land force, because Zhang Yuxia originally was a land force person, ground force. But over the past 20 years, he was a person in charge of China's military modernization in the military, particularly the last term, 5 years ago. Now, of course, Xi Jinping appointed He Weidong is for the domestic reason, political reason as well. But on the other hand, I mean, Zhang Yuxia was the commanding chief in terms of moon missile program. In addition, his previous experience as the director of the equipment. Li Shangfu is really the person expert on the on the missile, on the rocket force, and also the disciplinary person, General Zhang, also advanced from the second artillery. So three of these people really associated with missile, with the rocket force and etc. Now, of course, Miao Hua is a Navy by training. Now, one thing, you are right that the He Weidong is largely a land force person, but I just have difficulty to imagine that you are the commanding chief in the East, Operation Theater, how you use the land force target or give some pressure on Taiwan. So you do need to practice or at least have some solid knowledge in this area. Now, again, this is not necessarily contradictory with Joe's excellent assessment, but just be a little bit cautious about really echo what David said earlier on. They are moving that direction. Of course, it's not tested, and we still do not know. There's a political concern. And the appointed Cosmo Club is related with political control because that group is less political in terms of Chinese domestic politics. Xi Jinping wants to use them to broaden his power base. And also the fusion of the military and civilian development is certainly Xi Jinping wants to push. So with all this combination, it is political. And it's not tested. But I certainly echo David's observation. I just want to add one thing. This kind of narrative talk about China is really under threat and it's in a very dangerous environment. And Xi Jinping even used the term dangerous storm in the Party Congress report. But that has not been new in this party Congress. It has been around for 3, maybe 4 years. And he gave a numerous speech, some made it to public, some we probably can guess from the senior meetings, the 400 leaders meeting, to sense that that's the discussion about the ever-changing environment, more hostile environment. So you're absolutely right that it changed the narrative from Deng Xiaoping's peace and development. Yeah. So over.
So because the PLA is part of the party, right? It's the armed wing of the party. Do you think that Xi Jinping has built enough support in the standing committee, in the Politburo, the Central Committee, to do some of the reforms that Dave was talking about? Has he put enough people in enough places, or do you think that it's going to take some more time before he's able to really force through those changes?
I will see that from different level, from Politburo Standing Committee, of course, from Politburo, these are most of his own people, his proteges, of course, we support, I mean, at the moment. And also these people, they have better access of information. They differ from the ministerial level or provincial level leaders. Maybe they are far less well informed what's going on in the world. So of course, whether this is Xi Jinping's narrative, and I think by and large, I do not see the evidence. Some people strongly oppose that, at least for the time being. But having said that, in terms of China's foreign policy towards Ukraine, Russia-Ukraine war, I think that's a different story. I think there's a lot of different views. Maybe still the top level, maybe more or less, I mean, on agreement for the time being. But the whole country is very, very divided. You probably heard the story that friends want to have a dinner or lunch together. They want to say, we do not talk about Ukraine war because it's going to be so controversial among the Chinese. So that tells you how divided in that area. But relatively speaking, Xi Jinping's narrative and certainly also reflect his personnel. He brought more people from the police, from intelligence to senior position. I mean, in the past 40 years, no intelligence officer, the direct minister of the national security made it to the Politburo, but with Chen Wenqing's appointment, that changed. And certainly more people in the police, in this kind of apparatus actually advance their career. So that reflects Xi Jinping's concern. This is for both domestic challenge, but of course, more broadly, it's an international challenge as well. Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's great, and it ties right into Dave's point about keeping an eye out for not just Taiwan, right, but where else in the world they may be going. Ukraine, obviously tied with Russia. We've seen reports that they're looking potentially at bases in Africa and the Middle East and things like that. One of the questions that came in actually talks about this looking forward, and do we think that there's more of a militarization within this Congress? More leaders of the PLA being elevated, more of this kind of Xi Jinping's military outlook, security outlook, or is that going to change or be amplified? The specific example the question was talking about was Sri Lanka, but we could point to Cambodia, we could point to other places. Do we think that that's going to manifest itself differently going forward?
I think the two questions are excellent. Both are excellent, and also Larry, great to see you. It has been a while. And now, first the question about Sri Lanka and etc. At the time being, I think China will continue this Build the Road initiative. They may modify some of the narrative. They may call it a global initiative, and certainly that even a few years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, they already started to check some of the policies, whether it's economically it's a disaster and etc. So they will do some adjustment. But the point is, I don't think they will change that policy. I think that China will even put more emphasis to reach out. Now that Xi Jinping is going to visit, Arab countries, that there's another outreach. You can see that China's foreign policy, approach is very, very active. I mean, at the moment, particularly with ASEAN country and with Europe. And certainly, I don't think they will withdraw on that. There will be some technical adjustment. There will be some narrative change, but the overall policy, so long China's economy is still reasonably okay, they will continue that. Now, for Larry's question, I think this reminds me of what Debbie said early on. It's seemingly contradictory, but it's actually, in reality, Xi Jinping wants to hedging himself. On the one hand, certainly, He talked about struggle. He talked about fighting and etc. But at the same time, he also in the press conference immediately after announcement of leadership, he talked about China will be continue to be open. The window and the door will be even more open. So that personnel change reflects that he appointed these returnees. But there's several reasons. One is, if you look at the last party Congress, 20% of the Central Committee members are foreign educated returnees, with those who study Western dominated. Now, this time still is roughly Central Committee is still 20%, but the Power Bureau actually it's a double. Now, you also see a couple of them actually not from Western countries, like the case of the Ying Li, Beijing Party Secretary, Power Bureau member. He actually got his PhD from Russia, but he is a very exception. I mean, in the Central Committee. And another person, Zhang Guoqing, also spent many years in Iran. And also both of them also studied in the United States short term with several months or with a year. So that's the situation. I think Xi Jinping sent different messages. He positioned himself well, and partly also, most importantly, most of these people, if not all of them, are his protege. But we do need to project in the future what kind of leadership will be. It is unclear. I think that the probably will shift to. I mean, already my data already show that there will be less US, more UK, Germany, and Japan, and some of the military officers actually got training, got a degree from Russia. So that dynamic may start to shift, but the near future, because of the pool of the candidates, you cannot appoint people from out of nowhere, and that's the reason. Except besides the hedging and send the different messages. You appointed different people like Brandon, you said so right, very well. This is also, you have the different pool you have some kind of wolf warriors people, you have some kind of more economic, kind of market oriented people. Actually, most of these leaders, I mean, they serve as provincial leader, even they previously SOE CEOs, they usually in the coastal region in terms of Guangdong, Fujian, Zhejiang, Shanghai, and Beijing. These are the most cosmopolitan area, most market-friendly area. This is another message for private sector, which are not doing well. And so again, Xi Jinping wants to position himself. He can go to two different directions. So I hope that answers your question. I do not see it's an absolute contradiction, Larry. But you are right. We do need to reconcile this kind of tensions but it's still dynamic, still ongoing. China has not just wanted to isolate; they wanted to direct the fight with the United States. The recent summit between Biden and Xi certainly reflected China's effort to also reconcile the relationship in that way. But at the same time, they are also realistic. They think that the tremendous pressure, largely from U.S. and U.S.-led ally. Over.
Joel, you guys do a lot of work on PLA military diplomacy and things like that. I want to get your 2 cents on this thought about what we might see. Is the CMC ready for that? Are they organized? Do they have any kind of experience? And what are we going to see, maybe going forward outside of the Taiwan scenario?
Well, I mean, I think if you're talking specifically about U.S. Military diplomacy with China, the superficial, almost farcical answer I can give you is it will be interesting because Li Shangfu, of course, has been subjected to U.S. sanctions since 2018 or so under CASI, and so we're going to have to work through that particular issue. No, I think more backing up a little bit. I think the real answer is that over the last month or so, you've seen very strong signs of a rebalancing in China's military diplomacy back towards getting things on track, things that were suspended for most of this administration and even before that, and even back to the Pelosi visit, a few of the remaining exchanges were canned. I suspect that you will see some of that start to come back online based on Xi's larger desire to stabilize relations with the United States right now. And I think he himself, for 10 years at different points, has emphasized the need for the mill-to-mill side of the relationship to be a stabilizer or a ballast of sorts. And I think they themselves recognize that they have an incentive in talking to us about crisis communication, risk reduction, crisis management, and so on, so that you don't see an unnecessary escalation, inadvertent escalation of tensions. Broader with military diplomacy, certainly you have an emphasis with Russia. That's been the case even in the last few weeks with the joint patrols. You have Li Shangfu. He's been sanctioned, but it's because he's been dealing so closely with the Russians for years. And so I suspect that that side of the relationship will continue to be strengthened. And then beyond the major powers, I think you will continue to see sort of a diversification of Chinese military diplomacy across the global south, but probably with an emphasis on the Middle East, North Africa, and into different parts of Europe and Central Asia as they start to build beyond, sort of the core of Djibouti. And it ties into the issue of potential basing. I think the latest China Mill Power report offers a couple additional locations, including in the Pacific Islands and in parts of maritime Africa, where they're looking very intently, and military diplomacy will be part of that package. But no, again, I think for the next year or so, they seem to be more interested in restoring what I think to their detriment had been lost over the last couple of years or so. And that's probably a good sign. Over.
Yeah, let me just add a couple to Joel's excellent comments. Chinese military diplomacy is going to follow the party's decisions on foreign policy in general. And if that case holds, then I think we're going to see a lot more activity on the periphery, especially in Southeast Asia, and then also Europe, where the Chinese are going to be looking to the Europeans for alternatives for technologies that they're getting cut off from. I was at the Shangshan Forum at the middle of the night last week due to time differences. And that entire platform was an exercise in talking to U.S. allies, partners, and third countries about not letting the U.S. browbeat you into cutting us off from technology. We're a force for stability there. The U.S. is a force for insecurity. So there's going to be a lot of activity in general on the Chinese foreign policy front. We already saw that with Xi Jinping going down to Southeast Asia for the G20 and APEC. The meetings coming up with Macron. He already saw Olaf Scholz prior to that. So I think Chinese foreign policy in general is going to be a lot more active in trying to get out there and get around the U.S. and the PLA won't be far behind. Over.
Do you think that she has crafted a CMC and a PLA leadership that's ready to do that kind of international engagement?
Well, it's not the job of the CMC to do that. The Central Military Commission is first and foremost a political organization that provides oversight to the PLA. And the question is, how effective is the Office of International Military Cooperation under the CMC and not the CMC itself? Again, Joel points out very importantly that Li Shangfu, the probable next Minister of Defense, we won't know that until NPC in March or April. He's under CASI sanctions, so that's going to be a little bit awkward, right? But the OIMC itself is going to have to step up its game and follow the direction of foreign policy in general. They'll report to the CMC, the CMC will show up when they need to show up, but I'm not sure that that's the first thing that they're worried about. It's sort of an additional duty. They're there to oversee the management and modernization of the PLA. I'm not even sure they're there to oversee operations of the PLA. Right? Jointness, I think, is going to be down at the theater level. So we'll have to see. I think the role of the CMC is going to have to evolve. Over.
That's a great point about the OIMC, and I know that Chad Sabraj is paying a lot of attention, as well as other people, but trying to tease that out as the China goes out into the world, right? As their interests continue to expand, BRI and whatnot. They're going to potentially play a much bigger role, and we'll just kind of see what they're doing. I did want to shift
by the way, for the great work on military diplomacy that the center at NDU has been doing. So we all thank you for that stuff.
Yeah, I find that invaluable when I'm talking to senior Air Force leaders to just kind of describe what it is that China is actually doing, right? As opposed to what the media reports and things like that. So I wanted to shift really quickly I guess it ties back into the Cosmos Club, but what do we see for space, right? China has surpassed the United States in the number of launches. We're still ahead maybe on a year-to-year by number of satellites because we do more satellites per launch, but certainly they're a competitor like no other, surpassing the Russian/Soviet Union quite a bit, expected to expand exponentially, both military as well as, and I'll put it in air quotes there, commercial. So anybody have thoughts on what we should see as far as the impacts of this Congress on the national security again, because everything tends to be national security with Xi Jinping, but just specifically looking at the space domain. I'll just throw that out there to the group.
Well, Brendan, I suppose just to take kind of a first pass at this, I mean, we can't help but note that Li Shangfu spent almost the entirety of his career in the field of space launch, and then he was appointed as deputy commander of the SSF for the Space Systems Department. And so there will be a voice, if they ever have discussions about military uses of space and so on, there will be a natural voice for that at the senior decision-making table. But beyond that, I try not to read too much into specific personal appointments in terms of functional priorities. I think as a matter of military strategy and doctrine, that it has long been the case that space is considered as a very strategic domain over which they need to excel and achieve superiority. I think the questions in terms of military use for space for China will be in terms of sort of a counter space, being able to hold U.S. space-based positioning, communications, et cetera, at risk, which they're already doing. But beyond that, actually space-based strike. And we have seen in the recent China Mill Power Report further references to the fractional orbital bombardment system tests that have been taking place over the last couple of years. But I think a task for the CMC as well as the PLA goes global and they themselves start to rely more on space-based assets for navigation, communications, et cetera. What incentives do they have to avoid escalation in space, which I think is a topic that they haven't quite given enough thought to, but through our mill-to-mill channels, I think we need to have further conversations about appropriate behavior to include things such as anti-satellite tests and what have you. Over.
Brandon, if I may, I want to comment your excellent work. I mean, your institute produced so many excellent reports that I certainly learned a great deal. But I think I cannot emphasize enough about the rise of Cosmos Club. I started to write about that 10 years ago, but now in a growing, very, very stable rate. But also this is reflect Xi Jinping's agenda, Xi Jinping's priority in both domestic and foreign, and particularly with nationalism, national pride, and the technological competition with the United States. And also that I will not be surprised that in 5 years, some of them will move to even more important position, become policymakers. Of course, this is also a group of very diversified people, but the importance of the military-civilian fusion is the things we need to monitor very, very carefully. Again, that group is, as I indicate, that it could be a different subgroup, and but I think that they are well positioned for various reasons. That for even the political competition among the new groups under Xi Jinping. So I think that for various reasons, political, strategic, technological, and China's outreach, and you name it, just so important. So last things, I really appreciate Joe's very careful assessment of the Taiwan issue. I think your narrative is really excellent. That particularly on one hand, you sent China maximum pressure on Taiwan, but at the same time, we should not exaggerate some of the move, and certainly that can balance assessment. I think it's very, very important. We should not underestimate, but we should not exaggerate some of those things. I think David also echoed that. I think three of us, panelists, I think at least from my perspective, we reach a similar kind of assessment.
Dave, you want to jump in on the space question there?
No, not much to add to what Chung and Joel had to say. I mean, obviously, space is a symbol of national status to a certain degree. And China, the rising China, wants to be known as a space player. It's a throwback to the 50s and 60s. It's critical to their economic well-being. It's critical to their future concepts of warfare. So space is an increasingly critical domain and has been for a long time. Dean Cheng has been writing about this for a long time. So you can't overestimate the importance of the outer space domain to China's economic, political, and military interests.
Yeah, and I just want to, I'll just foot stomp that for everyone watching. As Cheng-Li has mentioned a couple times here, military civil fusion is something that I don't think we have a great enough appreciation for. CASI's tried to do some work on it to highlight it. But I think that really, especially when it comes to space, is going to be one of the huge challenges that we have to get our hands around to figure out how to compete on the economic side, on the commercial side, on the scientific side, and then as Joel was talking about, on the military side, because the war of the future in space is going to be far more complicated than I think we are ready for at this point. I was in the UK a couple weeks ago for some space talks, and the thing that I posed to them is what happens when the U.S. government is buying information from a German or a French provider, and some sort of conflict arises, and China decides to go after that German civilian company's satellite or British civilian company's satellite, and who indemnifies it, and is that something we are going to accept as the U.S., as the world, and going forward, and just the how intertwined through military civil fusion, through the placement of party officials, obviously in the military, but also throughout society, and those dual hats, and what are the implications as we go forward. So, but with that, I want to be mindful of everybody's time. We are right at the hour-and-a-half mark. So, gentlemen, I want to once again thank you for all the work that you've done. Not just for this webinar, but for getting us here, for being the part of the nerd crowd that sits down and goes through these documents with a very fine-tooth comb, so that we can bring out the highlights and get the information to people on the call at ACC throughout the DoD and the Air Force. But one last time, I really appreciate all of the work and the efforts, and taking some time today to share it. This will be up eventually on the CASI website, so look forward to that. Hopefully it'll be a stuffing stock, or if not, maybe in sometime in January. But once again, on behalf of CASI and our ACC partners, I just wanted to thank you very much, and thanks to everyone on the call in YouTube and Facebook. And we will see you next year. So Happy New Year, Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays. Thank you, everyone.